Well, it was one of the defining policies of the Trump administration, a trade war with China that ended up damaging both sides. Now, for the first time since taking office, the Biden administration has laid out its own view of trade with China and carried over much of the same combativeness. U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai telling an audience in Washington that she expects China to stick to purchases it pledged to as part of a trade agreement last year. Now, Tai was more broadly critical of Beijing's industrial policies, saying efforts to dominate chip production, for example, are damaging to U.S. interests.
We must defend to the hilt our economic interests. And that means taking all steps necessary to protect ourselves against the waves of damage inflicted over the years through unfair competition. We need to be prepared to deploy all tools and explore the development of new ones, including through collaboration with other economies and countries.
All right, that was U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai. Now, as I mentioned, that trade dispute began with Donald Trump's presidency. Angered over the trade deficit with China, he imposed tariffs on a range of Chinese goods. In June 2018, Washington hit Chinese products totaling $50 billion. A year later, the tariffs were ramped up to a total $500 billion. The goods targeted included steel and aluminum, solar energy products, even washing machines. Now, China responded with counter tariffs, and the ensuing trade war drew protests from U.S. businesses who saw their own costs rising. Now, in January 2020, the U.S. and China reached a partial agreement. Beijing committed to purchase an additional $200 billion worth of U.S. goods by the end of 2021. That included things like soybeans, corn, meat, energy, and industrial goods. However, trade data suggests that Beijing is not on path to fulfill those commitments. All right, for more on this, I'm joined by Stormy Mildner. She's executive director of the Aspen Institute, Germany. Stormy, good morning. Before we begin, I want to actually share another part of that speech from Katherine Tai, the trade representative. Let's listen to that.
These policies have reinforced a zero-sum dynamic in the world economy, where China's growth and prosperity come at the expense of workers and economic opportunity here in the U.S. and other market-based democratic economies. As our economic relationship with China evolves, so too must our tactics to defend our interests.
All right, you heard it there, Stormy. A zero-sum game, protecting our interests to the hilt. Is this the kind of language that we expected from this administration?
Yes, actually, I did expect this. So there is a lot of continuity between the Trump administration and the Biden administration with regard to the substance of China policy. And I did expect that continuity because China is really perceived as a large threat to the United States, a threat both in economic terms, a threat to U.S. economic interests, but it is also a threat to the economic and social system of the United States. It's really a competition of different systems. And this is a threat perception which is widely shared in the U.S. population, and it is also shared among Democrats and Republicans in Washington. So really, I was not surprised to hear what Katherine Tai had to say yesterday with regard to U.S.-China policy.
Stormy, what does this mean for European leaders? They're meeting tomorrow in Slovenia to discuss a number of issues, among them relations with China. What does this positioning by the U.S. mean for them?
So Katherine Tai yesterday outlined 4 priorities or 4 strategy points for the U.S. to pursue. And the first one was enforcing the Phase 1 deal. The second one is more targeted tariff programs. The third one is defending U.S. economic interest. And the fourth one, and that's important for the Europeans, is working together with the allies to, and she said it quite clearly, to ensure a race not to the bottom, but a race to the top. So there's a clear expectation by the U.S. government to work with the Europeans, but also for the Europeans to work more or to follow a tougher approach towards China. I would say that in the transatlantic relationship, the relations between the EU and China are kind of a litmus test where the U.S. looks very closely at its allies if we will perform according to U.S. interests.
Can the U.S. convince European allies who have been skeptical in recent months, perhaps. Briefly, if you can, Stormy.
Well, I think you can see very clearly that also in the European Union that we do see a shift, a greater risk perception vis-à-vis China as well. You know that there's an initiative of certain European countries together with China, the 17+1 or 16+1 initiative, and there was a reality check. China did not deliver on a lot of promises. Many countries noticed that they are increasingly going into harmful dependencies with China. So there is a switch in European perception and China policy, and that gets us closer together. However, we are much more dependent on China. So I think there are going to remain some conflicts in the transatlantic relationship vis-à-vis China.
All right, Stormy Mildner there. She's Executive Director of the Aspen Institute, Germany. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.